Today, we are going to explore why two major religions of India, Buddhism and Jainism, emerged when they did, and how various social, religious, economic, and linguistic factors all came together to create right conditions for them. We'll talk about the backdrop of the Vedic religion, the rising towns and trade, new social groups, the role of language and debate, and more in a way that's easy to follow. In the centuries leading up to the 6th century BCE, India's religious life was dominated by what we call the Vedic tradition. This tradition placed heavy emphasis on elaborate sacrifices, yagnas, and rituals. Over time, these sacrifices and rituals became increasingly expensive, complex, and mostly the domain of priests, the Brahmins. Ordinary people found the religious pathway was difficult to access, and many rituals seemed removed from everyday life. Meanwhile, the caste system, which divided society into Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, became increasingly rigid. Your birth, your gender, your caste often determined your religious and social standing. The combination of growing ritual burden, priestly dominance, and social exclusion created a lot of unrest and dissatisfaction within the society. At the same time, the economic and social landscape of the Indian subcontinent was changing. This period saw what historians call the second urbanization. Towns, trade centers, and burgeoning commerce began to rise in the Gangetic Plains and surrounding regions. New social classes emerged, for example, householders, Ghapatis, and merchant traders, Sethis, who were not Brahmins and who found the Vedic order less appealing. These people were looking for spiritual paths and religious philosophies that were more inclusive and accessible rather than being locked into ritual and caste. Buddhism and Jainism answered that call. Both rejected the extreme ritualism of Vedic tradition, challenged the dominance of the Brahmin priesthood, and offered paths in which individual men or women could strive for spiritual liberation. They appealed to these emerging groups who felt out of the traditional order. Another reason for the growth of Buddhism and Jainism was their use of vernacular languages and more accessible forms of discourse. When the Vedic religion and its texts were in Sanskrit, a language accessible largely to the educated Brahmins, Jain and Buddhist teachers used language of the masses. For example, early Jain teachings were Prakrit, specifically Ardh Magadhi, and early Buddhism in Pali. This meant their messages could reach farmers, traders, and ordinary townfolk. Also, both tradition made use of traditional debate, assemblies, and merchant teachers traveling, discussing, and spreading their ideas in simple language in groves in huts called the Kutul Garshala. Such vibrant intellectual and religious exchange made this new phase dynamic and popular. The decline of the older religious order and the rise of the new tradition also had an economic dimension. The new urban center and merchant class valued ethics like non-violence, truthfulness, and fair trade, all of which Buddhism and Jainism emphasized. The agrarian surplus created by the use of iron tools, rice transplantation, and expansion of settlements made it possible for people to think beyond more survival and engage with spiritual thought. Some scholars point out that Vedic tradition insistence on animal sacrifice clashed with the values of a society becoming more settled and mercantile. The new religions emphasizes on ahimsa, non-violence, renunciation of excessive ritual, and moral conduct resonated deeply. Finally, the social inclusiveness of Buddhism and Jainism cannot be overstated. They welcome people from various castes and both men and women into paths of spiritual liberation. This was in the stark contrast to the older system where social mobility and access to knowledge were highly restricted. Because of all these overlapping factors, ritual fatigue, social change, economic shifts, language accessibility, intellectual debate, Buddhism and Jainism found fertile ground and spread across many parts of India. To summarize, the emergence of these religions was not result of a single factor but the convergence of several, the rigid, ritualistic, caste-based Vedic system that many had found unhelpful, the rise of urban trade and new social groups seeking new religious options, the use of vernacular languages making ideas accessible, the culture of debate and traveling teachers, and the appeal of moral and ethical values suited to an evolving society. Buddhism and Jainism provide spiritual paths that were relevant, accessible, and timely. If you like this video, do share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.